My name is Barbara. I'm 36, and I suppose you could say I live what some would call a charmed life. I'm married to a man I not only love, but deeply respect, and we've built something real, something we're both proud of. People assume a lot when they hear I'm married to a successful businessman, but here's the part they don't know. I married him when he was still wiping oil off his forearms with a ripped towel and eating instant noodles between shifts. I didn't come into this life. I helped build it, piece by piece, alongside the man I still wake up excited to see every morning. Thomas owns a growing chain of specialty repair shops that cater exclusively to German cars: Mercedes, BMW, Audi, even the occasional Porsche. What started with 2 lifts and a lot of faith is now a network of state-of-the-art garages, known all across the region for their precision and transparency. And despite the growth, Thomas has never lost his hands-on approach. He still visits the garages weekly, still gets his hands dirty, still insists on teaching every new hire himself. It's something I love about him, that he never forgot where he came from. And truth be told, being around his world all these years, I've picked up more than people expect. I may not rebuild engines myself, but I know the difference between torque steer and alignment pull. I know how to spot early signs of transmission lag. I can tell you how to clean a throttle body, what kind of coolant a turbocharged VE6 prefers, and I can absolutely feel when a car's idle isn't sitting right. It's not a job for me, but it's become a quiet kind of hobby, especially with the kind of machines Thomas surrounds himself with. A few months ago, for my birthday, he gave me something I hadn't even dared to ask for: a 1983 Mercedes 280 SL convertible. Deep navy with parchment leather interior. A car that looks more like it should glide through a Fellini film than sit in a suburban garage. The first time I drove it, I felt like every mile of road beneath me belonged to a different era. The engine purred low and steady, the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention but earns it anyway. I fell in love. That car became my weekend ritual. I'd drive it to the market on Saturdays, to the flower shop downtown where they still hand-tie bouquets, or just around the lake with the top down and my favourite records playing through a modernised, retro speaker system Thomas had custom installed. It wasn't about showing off. It was about joy, about the luxury of something beautiful, well-made and deeply personal. So when I began hearing a faint tapping behind the dash on a Wednesday morning, I noticed immediately. It wasn't loud, and most people might have brushed it off as a vent or a loose knob, but I knew better. The 280 SL's interior was built like a bank vault. If something rattles, it means something's not seated right. I checked the glove box, the air vents, the underdash screws. Everything looked fine. I even gently tapped the dash trim with my knuckles. No flexing, no obvious play. Still, that sound persisted. A hollow rhythmic tick that didn't match the road bumps or engine note. Definitely not normal. I debated whether to wait for Thomas to get home. He was on a 4-day trip overseeing the retrofit of his newest shop and had already called me twice from the road to talk about staff, suppliers, and how the paint samples were driving him nuts. I didn't want to bug him. Besides, it wasn't like I couldn't handle this myself. That's what the shops were for. He always tells me, "Babe, any location, pick whichever's easiest. They'll take care of you." So I decided to swing by the original shop, the very first one he ever opened. It was closest to home and I hadn't been by in a while. The drive there was smooth, aside from the rattle that I turned down the radio to monitor. The car still ran like a dream, but I couldn't ignore that sound any longer. It was like a fly buzzing somewhere behind a curtain, too subtle to be dangerous, too persistent to ignore. When I pulled into the garage lot, I felt a strange flicker of nostalgia. I remembered coming here years ago when Thomas used to work until midnight, covered in grease, and we'd eat dinner sitting on the curb behind the shop. A younger version of me used to bring him coffee and tease him about the streaks on his face. We were just kids, in love and dreaming big. I parked the 280 SL carefully, easing it into the far bay, and grabbed my bag. As I stepped out, I instinctively ran my hand over the driver's side mirror. Dustless, cool to the touch. The car had been cleaned just 2 days ago. Thomas had it detailed while I was out running errands. That's the kind of man he is. I walked into the office and waited by the desk. The sound of a TV drifted in from the break room. Sports commentary. Something about a goal being unbelievable. No one looked up right away. I stood there patiently, glancing at a corkboard full of flyers for tyres and fluid flushes. Psst. Eventually, 2 guys wandered out, half looking my way. I smiled. "Hi, I'm Barbara. I brought in a Mercedes, 280 SL. There's a rattle behind the dash. Not urgent, just weird. Hoping someone can take a look." One of them nodded vaguely, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. "Yeah, sure. We'll get around to it," he said, pulling a form from the counter. "Might be a while." I filled out the paper, handed over the keys, and watched as they walked back outside. No clipboard, no inspection, no curiosity. I told myself maybe they were just distracted, but something about the way they looked at me made my stomach twist. And as I stood there watching one of them climb into my car like it was any other job, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being sized up. Not as a customer, not as a car enthusiast, but as someone they'd already dismissed. And that stung more than I wanted to admit. I stayed in the waiting area longer than I'd planned, half hoping they'd surprise me by coming back with thoughtful questions or observations, maybe even a compliment about the condition of the car. Nothing dramatic, just some signal that they saw what I already knew. That this vehicle was special, and not just because of its make or model, but because of the intention behind it. A gift from a man who knew me to the core. Something I cherished. But instead, they vanished into the garage, and I was left with the sound of the TV blaring highlights from some soccer match. I could see through the window that my car hadn't even been pulled into a bay yet. It sat out front, half in the sun. One of the guys, Jake, I later learned, leaning against the hood with a bottle of soda in hand, texting on his phone. I tried to breathe through the irritation. I reminded myself that this was just a bump in the day. People had off moments. They didn't know who I was, and honestly, it shouldn't have mattered. I wasn't looking for VIP treatment. I just wanted basic care, respect for the car, a little professionalism. Instead, after about 20 minutes, Jake came in and handed me my keys like he was returning a rental. "Loose trim, nothing big. We tightened it. You're good," he said with a lazy grin. I blinked. "That's it?" "Yeah," he shrugged. Already halfway turned back toward the break room. "Wasn't worth getting dirty over. Sound's gone, though." It was the way he said it. Like I'd interrupted something more important. Like I was a bother. I glanced out the window again and saw the other mechanic, Vince, back in the car, revving it unnecessarily before cutting the engine and slamming the door. He laughed, said something I couldn't hear. Jake responded with, "Tell her the steering wheel's crooked. Maybe she'll bring snacks next time." They didn't think I could hear them. I stood still for a second, keys in my hand, the edges pressing into my palm. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was embarrassment. Not for myself, but for them, for how small and foolish they sounded. It was as if the second they saw a woman walk in alone, especially one with blonde hair, no makeup, and a soft voice, they dropped into some 1990s sitcom version of masculinity. I walked back to the car, slowly, slid into the driver's seat. It still smelled like leather and polish, like care. But I felt like something had been taken from me. Not the car, not the trim, not even the way they spoke to me, but the respect that this place once held in my heart. I had sat in this exact spot 10 years ago, back when it was just Thomas and one other guy working late into the night, back when I brought takeout in paper bags and sat in the passenger seat, listening to him explain the difference between ceramic and semi-metallic brake pads. Those guys out there, they had no idea who I was. And I'm not talking about being the boss's wife, I mean who I was as a person. Someone who'd spent half her adult life helping build this business. Someone who listened to every part of the journey, every mistake, every triumph. Someone who understood the value of something rare, something built with hands and care and time. They saw a blonde with an old car and made their own conclusions. And the fact that they didn't know me wasn't the problem. The problem was, they didn't even care to ask. By the time I got home, Thomas had just finished his last meeting of the day. We always do this thing where we FaceTime at night when he's away. He was still in his polo, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, a laptop open behind him, room service untouched on the table. He smiled the second he saw me. "Hey babe, how's my favourite woman?" I hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Barbara?" "I brought the Benz to the shop today," I said casually. "Had that noise I told you about?" His brows pulled together. "Which shop?" "Your original, the main one." "Who helped you?" "Two guys, I only caught their names on the ticket, Jake and Vince." The silence that followed was different from the usual thoughtful pause. It was heavier. He closed the laptop behind him. "What happened?" I gave him the short version. No dramatics, no embellishments, just facts. The comments, the delay, the attitude, the way they dismissed me. His face changed slowly as I spoke. Not with rage, but something cooler, sharper. The way Thomas looks when he realizes someone just crossed a line he didn't think he'd ever have to define. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose and rubbed his jaw. "Tomorrow," he said, calm and even. "You and I are going back there together." And in that moment, I realized he wasn't angry just because they were disrespectful. He was angry because someone had treated his wife like she was nothing, and that was a mistake they wouldn't be making twice. The next morning, Thomas got back into town early. He didn't say much over breakfast, just sipped his coffee and scrolled through something on his phone, probably checking the shift schedules. His expression was unreadable, but his silence wasn't cold. It was measured. Like a man drawing a line in chalk before picking up the hammer. We drove together in the 280 SL. He insisted. I think part of him wanted to feel what I'd described. Hear the cabin with his own ears. The rattle was gone, as expected, but the tension between us hummed quietly, like static. When we pulled into the shop lot, I spotted the same two guys immediately. Jake was leaning against the side of the garage, sipping from a styrofoam cup, and Vince was bent over the hood of a 5 Series BMW, cracking a joke to someone inside. Neither noticed us at first. Thomas stepped out, adjusted his jacket and said, "Stay with me." We walked straight into the Bay Area. The sound of tools and compressors fell into a hush when the guys realized who was standing in front of them. Jake's face dropped first. Color drained so fast it looked like someone turned off a switch inside him. Vince straightened up quickly, wiping his hands on a rag, forcing a smile that didn't stick. "Boss," Jake said, clearing his throat. "Didn't know you were coming in today." Thomas didn't smile. "No, I'm sure you didn't." He turned slightly toward me, calm but direct. "This is Barbara, my wife." The moment those words landed, something shifted. Both of them froze. Jake's eyes darted to the Mercedes, then back to me, his mouth open but no words coming out. "I sent my wife here yesterday," Thomas continued, his voice low but firm. "And instead of showing her the respect you'd give any customer, you treated her like an inconvenience. Worse, you mocked her, mishandled a vintage car that's older than you. And you assumed she wouldn't notice." He paused. Let the silence stretch until it stung. "I've let a lot slide with you two. The shortcuts, the missed documentation, even the rumors about parts going missing. I wanted to believe people can grow if you give them the chance." Jake started to speak. "Look, it wasn't—" "No," Thomas cut in. "We're done." His voice didn't rise, but it hit hard. "You're both fired. Effective immediately." No shouting, no scene. Just the sound of two careers crumbling under the weight of their own arrogance. As we turned to leave, I glanced back once. They didn't look angry. They looked humiliated. And somehow, that was enough. The ride home was quiet but not tense. Thomas kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on my leg, like he needed that contact to anchor him. I glanced at him a few times, his jaw still tight, eyes focused, but there was something else under the surface, a sort of quiet sadness. "I gave those two more chances than they deserved," he said finally, not looking away from the road. "Jake's been with me 4 years, Vince almost 3. I knew they cut corners sometimes, but I thought it came from laziness, not disrespect. I didn't think they were like that. He didn't have to explain what that meant. The kind of men who only take people seriously if they look a certain way, speak a certain way, walk into a room wearing the kind of confidence they understand. I reached over and squeezed his hand. You can't blame yourself for their choices. He gave me a quick, grateful look, but I could tell it still sat heavy on him. Thomas wasn't just their boss. He was someone who believed in second chances, who had been given second chances once. He hired people with records, people who needed stability, people who hadn't always been handed the best cards. But this had crossed a different kind of line. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I felt something shift inside me too. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. I wasn't upset anymore about how I'd been treated. I was proud that I'd said something, that I hadn't let it slide, told myself it wasn't worth the trouble. Because it was worth it. And not because I'm the boss's wife, because I'm someone who knows the value of what I bring into a room, who knows cars, who knows people, who knows when something beautiful is being handled carelessly, and I'm never going to be quiet about that again. Word spread faster than I expected. By the end of the week, 2 other employees from different locations texted me, yes, me, to say they were sorry I went through what I did and that I'd done the right thing. One of them, a guy named Devon, who'd been working under Vince for months, admitted he'd seen little things, unlogged parts, weird side jobs done off the books, but didn't feel safe speaking up. He ended the message with, "Glad someone finally said it." I showed Thomas the texts. He nodded, thoughtful, and didn't say much, but I could tell he was processing. Not just the situation, but the broader truth, that trust in leadership doesn't mean letting things slide. It means protecting the people and values that built the business in the first place. And I think, in his own way, Thomas realized he'd been trying so hard to believe in those 2 that he'd overlooked what they were really doing to the shop and to the culture he cared so deeply about. The following Monday, he called a meeting across all locations, not just for managers, but for everyone. Techs, office staff, front desk. I went with him, which surprised some of the guys, but no one said a word. Thomas stood in the center of the main garage, sleeves rolled up, voice calm but firm, and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Respect is non-negotiable in this company. I don't care who you are, how long you've worked here, or how good you think you are with a wrench. If you treat a customer like they don't matter, you're not just risking their loyalty. You're disrespecting the very place that feeds you." He didn't mention my name, but everyone knew. And here's the thing. After that, the energy changed. I'd stop by to drop off coffee or lunch, and people actually made eye contact, asked questions, smiled. One young guy at a newer shop even asked if he could take a look under the hood of my 280 SL, just to admire the clean condition. He called it immaculate. I'll admit that made me grin. As for the car itself, after the incident, Thomas had one of his senior techs do a full inspection. Turned out the issue was a small trim piece that had vibrated loose during a hot stretch of weather. But the way the guys handled it, that was never about the car. It was about how they viewed people. Women, customers, authority, all of it. A few weeks later, I got an email from one of the newer employees, a woman in her 20s, working in parts and reception. She thanked me, said she'd experienced her own share of jokes and comments, but had been afraid to bring it up. Watching how Thomas responded to what happened with me gave her the courage to speak up too. I sat with that email for a long time. Not because it surprised me, but because it reminded me why silence helps no one. Life went on after that. Smooth, grounded. Thomas stayed busy, the kids came home from summer camp, and I started researching vintage steering wheels for the 280 SL, something I'd always wanted to customize. Just a little. And one morning, while backing out of the garage with the top down, breeze in my hair, coffee in hand, I realized something simple but powerful. Standing up for yourself doesn't always feel heroic in the moment. Sometimes it just feels necessary. But later, once the dust settles, you look back and realize that was the moment everything changed. Not just for you, but for everyone watching too. About a month after everything settled, Thomas and I were having dinner on the patio, just the two of us, under those string lights he insisted on hanging himself years ago. He poured us each a glass of wine, the good bottle we'd been saving, and said, almost out of nowhere, "You know, I think this was a turning point for the business, for me." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, this man I'd seen build something from grease and nothing, who still couldn't quite believe how far he'd come. He looked tired, but in a good way, the kind of tired that comes with growth. "I used to think giving people chances, endless chances, was what made me fair," he continued. "But I realise now it's not fair to the rest of the team, or to you, or to me. Protecting the wrong people just puts the right ones in harm's way." I reached over and rested my hand on his. "You were never wrong for believing in people. You just finally believed in yourself enough to stop tolerating what you knew wasn't right." He smiled softly, like that meant more than I knew. "The shop has been running better since. Morale is up, customers are happier, and Thomas hired a new lead tech, a woman actually, from a high-performance tuning shop. She knows engines inside and out and doesn't take nonsense from anyone. I liked her immediately. As for me, I still drive my 280 SL every week. I still polish it by hand, still smile every time the engine hums to life. But now, when I pull into the shop, any location, I get more than polite nods. I get real respect. Not because of who I'm married to, but because I spoke up when it mattered." And that's the story, really. It's not about revenge or power or even the car. It's about being seen. And about making sure the places we love, whether they're homes, businesses, or garages filled with beautiful machines, stay worthy of that love. Because what we build with care deserves to be protected, and so do we.